You've never hurt anyone the way people get hurt in stories. No grand betrayal. No moment you could point to and say, "There, that was the line I crossed." But you've done something quieter. You've held warmth back at the exact moment someone needed it most. You've said something true, and chosen it precisely because of how it would land. You've watched someone unravel and felt, somewhere beneath the genuine concern, a small and shameful flicker of control, and you have never said that out loud, because you are also the person who feels a stranger's grief like it belongs to you, who carries the emotional weight of every room you walk into, who lies awake at night holding other people's pain. Both of these things live inside you, and that is the thing no one has ever fully explained. Most conversations about empathy treat it as a single, clean quality. You either have it or you don't. You're either the healer or the one doing harm. But psychology is now pointing towards something more uncomfortable than that, a third kind of person. Someone who feels with extraordinary depth and occasionally quietly uses that feeling, not out of cruelty, out of fear. And the fear is the part this is really about. In 2021, researcher Nadja Haim and her colleagues published findings identifying what they called the Dark Empath. Individuals who score high on empathic ability while also carrying traits associated with the Dark Triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and subclinical psychopathy, not fully, not in a clinical sense, but enough to create a very specific internal tension, enough to feel everything deeply and still sometimes choose impact over warmth. Here is what made the data striking. Dark empaths reported higher levels of subjective well-being than people who scored high on Dark Triad traits alone, without the empathy. They felt more, they suffered more, and paradoxically, that suffering kept them human in a way that pure darkness could not. They could not go fully cold. The warmth was real. It was just tangled with something else. Picture this. You walk into a room and within minutes you have already mapped it. You know who is pretending to be fine. You know who is desperate to be noticed. You know who is carrying something heavy beneath a steady expression. You feel these things before a single word is spoken. Most people with this ability use it to reach toward others, to offer presence, to make the invisible visible. The Dark Empath sees the same things, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, uses that knowledge to stay one step ahead, to remain needed, to hold the emotional center of a relationship in a way that cannot be easily disrupted, to ensure that closeness, once built, does not slip away without warning. And this is the question worth sitting with. Even if the answer is uncomfortable, why would someone who feels this deeply still reach for control? The answer does not begin in adulthood. It begins somewhere much earlier, in a smaller room, with fewer choices. The Dark Empath almost never developed their sensitivity as a gift. They developed it as armor. A child growing up in an emotionally unpredictable home, where love was real but inconsistent, where warmth arrived and vanished without explanation, where the mood of the house could change in a single afternoon. That child learns quickly to read the room. The nervous system adapts. With extraordinary, almost frightening precision, it begins scanning the emotional atmosphere the way a weather instrument reads pressure and temperature. This becomes the child who knows before anyone speaks that something has shifted, who adjusts their behavior to soften the tension, who discovers, slowly and without anyone ever saying it directly, that emotional awareness is the price of feeling safe. Psychologists call this hypervigilant attachment, a nervous system that never fully powers down because the threat of sudden emotional withdrawal has been learned so deeply it becomes the baseline. And inside that learning, quietly, without intention, a second lesson gets absorbed. Knowing what someone feels gives you influence over what happens next. The person who reads the room accurately can, to some degree, shape the room. No one teaches this directly. It seeps in. The way cold seeps into a building with thin walls. And here is where something that began as protection slowly becomes distortion. The empathy that was meant to connect gets partially redirected toward managing, toward maintaining position, toward ensuring that closeness can never be completely taken away without warning. The strategy forms, and strategies, once formed around survival, have a way of outlasting the threats that created them. The home becomes a memory, the child becomes an adult. New relationships form, deeper ones with real stakes, and the strategy still runs. In adult relationships, the Dark Empath is often the most magnetic person in the room. They remember what you said 3 conversations ago. They notice the shift in your voice before you notice it yourself. They make you feel genuinely like you are the only person in the conversation. That is not performance. The attentiveness is real. But underneath it, Nearly invisible even to the dark empath themselves, something is always calibrating. When they sense someone pulling away, they offer slightly less warmth, just enough to create a small uncertainty in the other person, not enough to be named as coldness. When they have something true to say, they choose the version that lands with the most weight. When reassurance is needed most, they sometimes hold it back, long enough to feel the shift in balance. These are not dramatic acts. They leave no evidence. They are the kind of thing only the person doing them truly knows happened. And this awareness is what separates the dark empath from someone who manipulates without conscience. They feel every single thing they do. The calculation registers. The guilt arrives almost immediately. The shame of having used sensitivity as a lever is not abstract. It is physical. It sits in the chest. And sometimes they do it again anyway, because the fear underneath has never been properly addressed. At its core, the fear is this: if I stop managing this, I will lose it. If I stop monitoring the emotional temperature, something will shift and I will not be able to recover it. If I become fully transparent, fully unguarded, I will be seen clearly, and what they find will not be enough to make them stay. That fear did not come from nowhere. It came from a time when love was genuinely inconsistent, when warmth disappeared without explanation, when the only version of closeness that felt safe was one the child had some influence over. That world was real. The fear made complete sense then. But that world is long gone. The body, though, has not been told. And this is what makes the dark empath one of the loneliest people in any room they enter. They are surrounded by closeness they have carefully shaped, relationships they have gently maintained, warmth they have in some small ways produced. And they sit inside all of it wondering, is any of this actually real? Would these people still be here if I stopped managing? Is what they feel for me genuine, or is it something I quietly built? That question is not a small one to carry. Most dark empaths carry it every day. There is a particular cruelty in being highly intelligent about your own patterns. It does not free you from them. It gives you an extraordinarily precise view of yourself repeating them. The dark empath does not lack self-awareness. They often have more of it than anyone around them. They see the moment they reach for control instead of connection. They recognize the calculation as it forms, and they still, sometimes, follow it through. Understanding a wound is not the same as healing one. Understanding tells you where the armor came from. Healing is something slower, more frightening. It is the long, unglamorous process of discovering that you can exist without the armor, and that the world does not collapse when you do. So what does that actually look like? It does not begin with eliminating the sensitivity. The sensitivity was never the problem. The ability to feel what others feel, to move through emotional landscapes with rare precision, to hold complexity that most people cannot even perceive. That is the most extraordinary thing about you. What needs to change is not the feeling. It is what the feeling gets used for. The old belief that closeness must be maintained through careful calibration. The assumption that if you stop monitoring, something essential will slip. The conviction that showing up as yourself, genuinely, without management, is a risk too large to take. These beliefs were formed by a younger version of you, in a world that gave you very few alternatives. They were the right conclusions for that time. They are not the right conclusions for this one. Healing begins with one practice, not a dramatic one, just noticing. The next time you feel the familiar pull, the impulse to withhold warmth as a test, to choose the version of the truth that lands hardest, to hold back reassurance in order to hold on to leverage, just notice it. Do not punish yourself for it. Do not perform guilt about it. Simply name it quietly as a pattern. A very old one that formed in a different world for a different version of you. And then, when you can, not every time, not perfectly, choose differently. Give the warmth you almost held back. Offer the reassurance that would have cost you influence. Let yourself be present without a strategy behind it. What most dark empaths discover, slowly and against their own resistance, is that when they stop managing, people do not leave. The ones who are real move closer. They feel the difference between being handled and being met, between carefully maintained warmth and warmth that simply exists. That second kind is rarer than almost anything, and the dark empath, of all people, is capable of it. The same sensitivity that learned to protect itself through strategy can, when the fear underneath is addressed, become something that needs no strategy at all. It becomes presence, undiluted, unguarded, the kind that changes the emotional temperature of a room without trying to. You are not the worst version of the story you tell about yourself late at night. You are a deeply feeling person who learned in a world that made it necessary to protect that feeling with armor. That is not a character flaw, it is a survival story, and survival stories are allowed to keep going. The next chapter does not require you to become someone else. It only requires one honest moment, one choice where you lay the calculation down and simply show up as you are, imperfectly, without a backup plan, and then another moment, and then another, until the weight of the armor becomes more exhausting than the vulnerability of living without it. Until the room you have spent your entire life scanning begins slowly to feel like somewhere you are allowed to rest. You have been carrying the emotional world for a long time. You do not have to keep carrying it alone. The sensitivity that made you feel so different, so complicated, so hard to fully know, it was never a burden, it was always the door. You just needed to learn that you were allowed to walk through it without managing what was on the other side. That is where it begins, not in a single realization. In a single, quiet, unguarded moment. One honest step toward the life that was always waiting just past the armor